A 5-gallon bucket sits in the corner of a backyard patio. Inside, banana peels, grass clippings, and a handful of pulled dandelions float in murky water. 10 days ago, this was kitchen trash and yard waste, the kind of stuff that gets bagged up and dragged to the curb every week. Today, the liquid has turned the color of strong black coffee. It smells earthy, slightly sour, alive. A gardener dips a cup into the bucket, mixes it with water in a spray bottle, and walks out to a row of tomato plants that have been struggling all season. A light mist on the leaves, nothing dramatic. Just a gentle spray, tops and undersides, then back inside for morning coffee. 48 hours later, those same tomato plants look like different organisms. Leaves that were pale and curling now stand upright. The green has deepened 2 shades. The stems look thicker, sturdier. Something shifted, and it cost exactly $0. This is what experienced gardeners quietly call black gold, a fermented plant extract so effective it makes most commercial foliar sprays look like expensive water. No store-bought kit, no special ingredients, just scraps from the yard and kitchen, a bit of patience, and a piece of science that has been hiding in plain sight for over 70 years. 1. The Cold War discovery that changed how plants feed. Here is a question that catches even veteran gardeners off guard. How does a plant actually absorb its nutrients? The standard answer, roots pull water and minerals from the soil, seemed like settled, unshakable science for centuries. Every textbook said it. Every agriculture program taught it. Roots were the mouth of the plant, and that was the end of the conversation. Then the 1950s happened, and a pair of university researchers accidentally rewrote the rules. In the years following World War II, the United States Atomic Energy Commission was looking for peaceful applications of nuclear technology. They funded a series of experiments at Michigan State University, led by 2 scientists whose names deserve to be far more famous than they are. Dr. H.B. Tukey, head of the Department of Horticulture, and Dr. S.H. Whitwer, his colleague and research partner. Their experiment sounded like something from a science fiction novel. They took radioactive isotopes, specifically radioactive phosphorus and radioactive potassium, and instead of putting them in the soil the way every protocol at the time demanded, they sprayed them directly onto the leaves of living plants. Then they waited. And then they switched on a Geiger counter. The clicking was immediate, rapid, unmistakable. The radioactive nutrients were not sitting on the leaf surface waiting to be washed off by the next rain. They were being pulled directly into the plant's internal system through microscopic pores called stomata, tiny openings on the leaf surface that most people never think about. The nutrients were moving through the plant's vascular system at a measured speed of 1 foot per hour. That alone was a significant finding. But the real shock, the number that should have fundamentally changed how every gardener and farmer on Earth feeds plants, was the efficiency comparison. When liquid nutrients were applied through the soil, Tukey and Whitwer measured that plants utilized roughly 10% of what was given. Just 10. The other 90% was wasted, locked up by soil chemistry, washed away by rain, or leached deep into the groundwater where no root could reach it. When those same nutrients were applied directly to the leaves, utilization jumped to 95%. Let that sink in for a moment. The difference between soil feeding and foliar feeding is not 10 or 20%. It is nearly tenfold. A plant fed through its leaves absorbs almost everything it receives. Dr. Tukey presented these findings to the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. He declared foliar feeding the most efficient method of applying nutrients to a plant ever documented in scientific literature. So why did this discovery never become common knowledge in the gardening world? Why are garden centers still lined with granular soil fertilizers instead of foliar sprays? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is simpler than that. It is economics. A home gardener who learns to make a free foliar spray from yard scraps does not buy bags of synthetic fertilizer. The profit motive quietly buried one of the most important horticultural breakthroughs of the 20th century. Not with secrecy, but with silence. The science, however, never went away. It has been confirmed repeatedly in the decades since. And today, anyone with a bucket, some kitchen scraps, and a little patience can put it to work. But effective foliar feeding requires nutrients in a liquid form that leaves can actually absorb. Where do those nutrients come from without spending a dime? 2. The rule that nature never breaks. Before mixing anything, it helps to understand a principle that governs every healthy ecosystem on the planet, and that most home gardeners unknowingly violate every single week. Picture a forest, not a managed woodland or a city park, but an old-growth forest that has been standing for hundreds of years. No one fertilizes it, no one waters it on a schedule, no one pulls the weeds or rakes the leaves. Yet the soil beneath that forest is among the richest, most biologically alive earth anywhere on the planet. The reason is not mysterious, it is mechanical. Everything that grows in that forest eventually falls back down and feeds the next generation. Leaves drop in autumn and decompose over winter. Branches crack and crumble into the soil. Fruit rots where it lands. Dead roots become food for fungi, which become food for bacteria, which become food for plants. Nothing leaves the system. Every mineral that was pulled up is eventually returned. Soil scientists have a name for this principle: the rule of return. Dr. William Albrecht, a pioneering agronomist at the University of Missouri, studied this cycle extensively in the 1940s. Across the Atlantic, Lady Eve Balfour ran the Hawley experiment in England, one of the first long-term, side-by-side comparisons of organic and chemical farming, and reached the same conclusion. The rule is blunt. Whatever a living system takes out of the soil, it must eventually put back. Break that cycle, and the soil slowly starves. Here is where this connects directly to the backyard garden. Most home gardeners break the rule of return every week without realizing it. They pull weeds and bag them for municipal pickup. They mow the lawn and haul the clippings to the curb. They toss banana peels and vegetable scraps into the kitchen trash. Each time this happens, minerals that the plants pulled from the earth, sometimes from deep underground, leave the property permanently. It is the equivalent of making withdrawals from a bank account without ever making a deposit. The balance drops slowly, invisibly, until one day the garden starts underperforming, and nobody can figure out why. Black gold reverses this pattern completely. It takes the very materials most gardeners spend money to throw away, weeds, grass, kitchen scraps, and cycles them back into the garden in a liquid form that plants can absorb immediately through their leaves. The next logical question: what exactly makes these common scraps so nutritionally valuable? The answer lies in the specific chemistry of each ingredient, and it explains why this combination rivals products that cost $15 to $20 a bottle. 3. 3 free ingredients that outperform store-bought fertilizer. Consider the banana peel. Every day, millions of them go straight into kitchen trash cans across the country. Most people do not give it a second thought. That peel is loaded with potassium, and potassium is not just another mineral name on a fertilizer label. It is the nutrient that controls the opening and closing of stomata, the same leaf pores that the 1950s scientists discovered were the gateway for foliar feeding. A plant short on potassium cannot regulate its own breathing. It wilts faster in heat, recovers slower from stress, drops blossoms before they set fruit, and produces weaker harvests. Potassium is the mineral that gives a plant structural toughness, the ability to stand up to wind, heat, and drought without collapsing. Banana peels also carry significant amounts of magnesium. This matters more than most gardeners realize. Magnesium is not a supporting player in plant biology. It is the leading role. It sits at the center of every single chlorophyll molecule in every green leaf on the planet. Without adequate magnesium, chlorophyll production drops, leaves pale, and photosynthesis, the entire engine that powers plant growth, slows to a crawl. Now add fresh grass clippings to the picture. Freshly cut grass is essentially a nitrogen sponge. Every green blade is packed with nitrogen, the nutrient that drives vegetative growth. Thick stems, vigorous new leaves, the kind of lush green that makes a garden look alive and thriving. Most gardeners spend real money on nitrogen-heavy fertilizers while simultaneously bagging up free nitrogen every time they mow the lawn and setting it on the curb for the garbage truck. The third ingredient might be the most surprising of all: common garden weeds, dandelions, clover, plantain, lamb's quarters. If comfrey or stinging nettle grows nearby, even better. Most gardeners see these plants as enemies, nuisances to be pulled, poisoned, or cursed at. But weeds have a hidden talent that vegetable plants do not share. Weeds send taproots deep. Some reach 2, 3, even 4 feet below the surface. Down at those depths, they mine trace minerals that shallow-rooted tomatoes, peppers, and lettuces simply cannot access: iron, silica, zinc, manganese, boron. Why do trace minerals matter so much? John Kempf, one of the most respected voices in modern regenerative agriculture, has pointed out that most garden plants today are operating at only 15 to 20% of their actual photosynthetic capacity. Not because they lack sunlight, not because they lack water, because they are starved for specific trace minerals, particularly manganese and iron, that act as catalysts in the photosynthesis process. Without them, the machinery runs, but it runs at a fraction of its potential. Combining banana peels, grass clippings, and deep-rooted weeds together creates something that most store-bought fertilizers simply do not offer: a full-spectrum nutritional profile that covers everything from the heavy hitters like nitrogen and potassium all the way down to the trace elements that unlock a plant's real genetic potential. But here is the problem. Drop all of this raw material into a bucket of water and leave it sitting in the sun, and within a week the result will be a foul-smelling, pathogen-filled sludge that no one would want near their garden or their nose. The next step is what separates black gold from failure, and it involves a group of microscopic workers that humans have relied on for thousands of years. 4. The ancient bacteria that make it all work. The difference between a bucket of rotting plant matter and a bucket of powerful liquid fertilizer comes down to one thing: which bacteria take control of the process. In an uncontrolled bucket, the wrong microbes dominate. Putrefactive bacteria move in, break things down through decay rather than fermentation, produce foul gases, and create an environment where harmful pathogens like E. coli and Salmonella can thrive. This is rot. It smells terrible, it is potentially dangerous, and it has very little nutritional value for plants. Fermentation is a completely different biological process, and steering the bucket toward fermentation instead of rot requires introducing the right bacteria from the start. The bacteria needed here are lactic acid bacteria, known as LAB. These are the same organisms that have quietly served humanity for thousands of years. They turn milk into yogurt. They transform flour and water into tangy sourdough. They convert raw cabbage into sauerkraut. Every culture on Earth has a fermented food tradition, and lactic acid bacteria are almost always the workers behind it. When introduced into a bucket of plant matter and water, LAB multiply rapidly. They go to work on the tough cellular walls of the banana peels, the grass blades, and the weeds, slicing complex proteins and tightly bound mineral compounds into simple, small molecules. Amino acids and chelated minerals so small and so bioavailable that a plant leaf can absorb them almost instantly through its stomata. Getting these bacteria into the bucket is far easier than it sounds. A splash of the thin liquid whey that pools on top of a container of plain yogurt contains millions of live lactic acid bacteria. A small pour of regular whole milk works just as well. To fuel their rapid multiplication, a spoonful of dark molasses goes in. Molasses is pure carbohydrate energy, rocket fuel for bacteria. Now, here is where the biology becomes genuinely elegant. As the lactic acid bacteria consume the molasses and digest the plant material, They produce lactic acid as a natural byproduct. This acid steadily lowers the pH of the liquid, making the entire environment increasingly acidic. That rising acidity functions as a natural defense system, a biological shield. Harmful pathogens cannot survive in a low pH acidic environment. E. coli dies. Salmonella dies. The organisms that produce foul odors and pose health risks are systematically eliminated. Laboratory analyses of this type of controlled anaerobic fermentation consistently show that dangerous pathogens are destroyed within just a few days. No chemicals needed, no sterilization equipment, no store-bought additives. The same fundamental fermentation process that has safely preserved human food for millennia is now being applied to plant nutrition, and it works beautifully. So the science is clear, the ingredients are free, and the biology is reliable. The only thing left is the practical question. How does one actually put this together, step by step, with no room for error? 5. The 10-day black gold method. Everything needed for this process fits in a standard 5-gallon bucket with a lid. Nothing fancy, nothing purchased. Start by walking the yard. Grab a few generous handfuls of fresh grass clippings. The greener and fresher, the better, because green means nitrogen-rich. Pull up whatever weeds are available: dandelions, clover, plantain, chickweed, anything with roots. Longer roots are better because they have mined deeper minerals. From the kitchen, collect 3 or 4 banana peels. Take a pair of scissors or garden shears and roughly chop everything into smaller pieces. An inch or 2 is fine. The smaller the material, the more surface area is exposed, and the faster the bacteria can break it down. Drop all of it into the bucket until it is roughly half full of loosely packed green material. Fill the bucket with water, leaving a couple of inches of space at the top. One detail matters here, and it is important enough to repeat. Chlorine kills beneficial bacteria. Municipal tap water contains chlorine specifically to destroy microorganisms, which is exactly what is needed in drinking water, but exactly the opposite of what is needed in a fermentation bucket. If tap water is the only option, fill a separate bucket and let it sit uncovered outdoors for 24 hours. The chlorine will evaporate. Rainwater, if available, is the ideal choice, naturally soft, mineral-rich, and completely free of chemical additives. Now add the microbial starter. Pour in roughly a quarter cup of dark molasses, not light, not honey, but dark molasses, which has the highest mineral and sugar content. Then add about a quarter cup of liquid whey skimmed from the top of a container of plain yogurt or a quarter cup of regular whole milk. Give the entire mixture a slow, gentle stir with a long stick or wooden spoon. Place the lid on the bucket. This is a small but important detail. Do not seal it airtight. Fermentation produces carbon dioxide gas, and that gas needs a way to escape. Leave the lid resting on top, slightly loose, or drill a tiny hole if preferred. Set the bucket in a warm, shaded spot, beside the garden shed, under a patio table, or along a fence where it will stay out of direct afternoon sun. Then comes the hardest part for most gardeners: waiting. Every 2 or 3 days, lift the lid and give the contents a gentle stir. Over the course of 10 days, visible changes will unfold. The water will darken steadily, first brown, then deep chocolate, then nearly black. A slight sour smell, like yogurt or mild vinegar, confirms that lactic acid fermentation is proceeding correctly. If it smells aggressively rotten, something went wrong. Likely chlorinated water killed the good bacteria, and the batch should be dumped and restarted. After 10 days, the liquid is ready. Strain it through a piece of cheesecloth, an old pillowcase, or a fine mesh kitchen strainer into a clean container. The leftover plant mush still holds value. Toss it directly into the compost pile or bury it beneath a shrub or tree. The rule of return: nothing gets wasted. The dark concentrate is now ready for use, but between this bucket and the garden, there is one critical step: and skipping it is the single most common and most damaging mistake gardeners make with any homemade liquid feed. 6. The dilution rule that saves the garden. Here is where many well-intentioned gardeners accidentally destroy the very plants they are trying to help. That dark, rich concentrate is powerful. It is packed with organic acids, fermented mineral salts, amino acids, and concentrated nutrients. It was designed by 10 days of biological processing to be dense and potent, and that potency is exactly the problem if it reaches the garden undiluted. Pouring full-strength concentrate directly onto plant leaves, or even into the soil, will cause a reaction called osmotic shock. Instead of feeding the plant, the concentrated liquid will pull moisture out of the plant's cells. Leaves will burn, curl, turn yellow at the edges, and in severe cases, die entirely. It is the botanical equivalent of giving someone a salt overdose. The very thing meant to nourish becomes toxic at the wrong concentration. Dr. Elaine Ingham, one of the most widely cited soil microbiologists in the world, and researchers at the Rodale Institute have both emphasized that proper dilution is essential when working with concentrated biological extracts. This is not optional guidance. It is the difference between feeding a garden and destroying one. The rule is simple and non-negotiable. 1 part concentrate to 20 parts clean water. A 1:20 ratio. No shortcuts. In practical terms, that means adding roughly half a cup to 3/4 of a cup of concentrate into a standard 1-gallon pump sprayer and filling the rest with clean water. The resulting mixture should look like very weak tea, pale, almost translucent, with just a faint amber tint. If it still looks dark, add more water. When in doubt, go weaker, not stronger. A slightly dilute spray will still feed the plant effectively. An overly concentrated spray will cause damage that takes weeks to recover from. Pour the diluted mixture into a spray bottle or a pump sprayer. The best time to apply is early morning, before the sun climbs high enough to heat the leaf surfaces and cause rapid evaporation. Walk through the garden slowly and mist the leaves gently, covering both the tops and the undersides. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, roses, fruit trees, herbs, everything benefits. The goal is a fine, even mist, not a heavy drench. If liquid is dripping off the leaves, that is too much. Now think back to those Geiger counter experiments from Michigan State. Within 1 hour of that mist landing on the leaf surface, nutrients are already bypassing the soil entirely, slipping through the stomata and flowing into the plant's vascular system. Within 2 days, the difference becomes visible to the naked eye. Leaves look fuller, glossier. Color deepens from tired green to a rich, saturated shade. The overall posture of the plant changes. It stands taller, looks healthier, carries itself with a kind of quiet vitality that was not there before. There is a bonus effect that catches many first-time users off guard. The beneficial lactic acid bacteria delivered in the spray colonize the leaf surface, forming a living layer that crowds out harmful fungi. Plants treated regularly with properly diluted black gold show noticeably stronger resistance to common problems like powdery mildew. Not because any chemical fungicide was applied, but because the leaf surface is already occupied by beneficial organisms. There is simply no room for the bad ones to establish. 1 5-gallon batch of concentrate, diluted at 1:20, can supply weeks of regular spraying for an average home garden. The total cost remains what it was at the very beginning: 0. Conclusion. Somewhere along the way, gardening became more complicated than it needed to be. Store shelves filled up with bottles and bags and kits, synthetic powders, chemical sprays, expensive compost tea brewing systems. The message, spoken or unspoken, was clear. Growing things well requires buying things. Good results cost money. But the science tells a different story. The weeds pulled from the garden bed are not trash. They are mineral miners that did free work underground. The banana peels tossed in the kitchen bin are not waste. They are potassium and magnesium, packaged by nature and ready to be returned. The grass clippings raked off the lawn are not debris, they are nitrogen, free for the taking, waiting to be cycled back where they belong. Black gold is not a trick. It is a return to the way healthy, fertile systems have always operated. Materials cycling back into the soil and the plant, nutrients reaching the leaves through the most efficient pathway science has ever measured, and billions of beneficial bacteria doing the heavy lifting that chemicals were never designed to do. Tomorrow morning, save that banana peel. Pull that dandelion with the long taproot. Start a bucket. In 10 days, the garden will respond in a way that no product label has ever quite managed to deliver. If this was helpful, share it with a friend who gardens, and keep tending to your roots.